you think about when you call 000, it's at the absolute crisis point in your life, you know, and that's an average day in their work.
They are constantly in a state of emergency and they are constantly responding to emergencies.
Emergency.
Yeah, my husband's having a heart attack, hurry up!
The daily grind for a paramedic is stressful and unpredictable. The potential of being exposed to trauma is constant.
You just see lots and lots that happens to you while you're out. It distorts your mind.
With such easy access to extremely potent, addictive drugs and high rates of PTSD, some paramedics have resorted to taking medications.
It's not about getting a high. It's not about achieving any sort of sense of an unreal type of feeling. It's about just being able to function. There are way too many people suffering, and not just the paramedics, but their families. I think we've been at a crisis point for a very long time.
On Monday, April the 9th this year, Tony Jenkins arrived for his shift at the Belmont Ambulance Station in the New South Wales Hunter region. He'd served New South Wales Ambulance for 28 years.
It was a worthwhile profession. It had substance to it. He could be proud of something he did daily, and that would have been why he really loved to do it.
Tony Jenkins had been exposed to many traumatic events over the years.
He used to feel anxious going to jobs because you don't know what it is when you get there. You don't know who's going to be there, what's the scene. So there was always a bit of anxiety.
At 4:30 p.m, Tony Jenkins was called in to a meeting at the regional headquarters in Newcastle.
They said that he'd been called into a meeting, that the content was because he had been self-medicating.
When Dad came in, he said that he knew why he was there, and he then said that he was relieved because he knew that he needed help.
In the meeting, Tony Jenkins was confronted about anomalies in the fentanyl supplies at his station. Fentanyl is a potent opioid used for extreme pain relief. 16 vials had been compromised, suspected of being emptied out and secretly replaced with saline. The police had been notified that morning.
Since then, we've found out, for one, that each vial contains a huge amount. Even though it's a small vial, the amount that's contained in that vial is enough to kill a person.
He would have felt isolated, humiliated, definitely. But after 28 years, he was just someone that needed help.
The meeting finished at 6:15 p.m. and Tony Jenkins was driven back to his station. From there, he left alone.
I was in bed and I looked at the clock, 12:30, and I thought, I wonder. I texted him, "Are you still at work?" And I was confused because I knew something was up.
The next morning, police and New South Wales ambulance staff visited the family home.
And they came in, it was about 7:05, and just said that they'd found him. And he was deceased. And I didn't believe them.
We know that it was a trigger. He left that meeting with the direct intention of doing what he did, and he didn't come home and think about it. He did it straight away.
There was no notes, no witness, no minutes, no recording. Why would you do it like that? Why wasn't it done correctly?
New South Wales Ambulance Commissioner Dominic Morgan has met with the Jenkins family.
From my understanding of Tony Jenkins, he was this well-respected, well-regarded professional, and it concerns me greatly to think that a person with that reputation could find themselves so desperate.
Tony had 30 years worth of cumulative trauma in the ambulance. He then had what could have been up to 12 months, we're told, worth of self-medication that went unchecked and unnoticed. Their levels of failure of duty of care here are so clear.
Do you believe that the New South Wales Ambulance Service failed its duty of care?
I think everybody at some level thinks that they've failed when such a respected individual ultimately takes their own life. This is an absolute tragedy.
The case of Tony Jenkins is not a one-off. The ABC has obtained evidence that fentanyl theft, tampering and abuse has reached alarming levels around the country, with ambulance services in at least 4 states, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia and Victoria, raising concerns about fentanyl tampering in ambulance safes. Freedom of Information documents reveal deeply concerning evidence of almost 100 investigations into paramedics allegedly misappropriating drugs of addiction around Australia. New South Wales had the largest number of cases, where all up there were 36 completed investigations. Is the ambulance service at crisis point?
I don't believe the ambulance service is a crisis point. What I think we're doing is we're actively lifting the lid and discussing openly for the first time ever some really complex issues. I've commissioned a random check of stations around New South Wales. This is being directly done out of the Deputy Commissioner's office.
Last year, Ambulance Victoria was under investigation by the corruption watchdog for allegations that 22 paramedics were misappropriating fentanyl and other drugs. In 2014, the Victorian Commissioner personally apologised to 19 people who had wrongly been administered saline instead of fentanyl by ambulance staff. Clive Hawke served Ambulance Victoria for 37 years. He was team leader at the Haywood station.
37 years worth. It would have gone to lots of different traumatic cases, which builds up, and that's PTSD. That's a big one for him, unfortunately. I had no idea that he'd been using fentanyl.
One night in 2015, Clive Hawkes did not return home from work.
Mum and I had gone in to the station, saw the ambulance parked out front, and I was the first one that went in, and I found him slumped in the chair. They didn't resuscitate. They knew it was already past the resuscitation stage, and we knew that as well. We knew there was no hope for him, unfortunately.
In New South Wales, a specific investigation into fentanyl being switched out for saline is currently underway in the Hunter region.
I've commissioned an investigation, a fact-finding investigation, to specifically look into the aspects of fentanyl use and controlled substances within the Hunter area. But I want to be very clear that this is not just focused on Tony Jenkins. I want to know exactly how these items and controlled substances are being managed within the area, and to make sure that we're following all of the protocols and procedures that we have in place.
If we know that 16 vials of fentanyl have been compromised, potentially patients would have received saline instead of fentanyl. Should the community be concerned about this?
It's terribly inappropriate and concerning to me if they were administered saline, because that would have meant that they had arguably had inadequate pain relief, and that's very distressing for those individuals. What I can say is that there's no reports of adverse patient outcomes at this time.
Do you take responsibility, though, for this situation as New South Wales Ambulance?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, I'm the leader of this organisation.
So can you assure the community that fentanyl tampering isn't going to happen again?
No, unfortunately, these are one of the real challenges of delivering services which involve highly addictive drugs. And there is no doubt that these drugs can deliver great benefits for our patients, and so it's an appropriate part of the paramedic regimen. But it comes with a real challenge.
Oh, that's my favourite, one of my favourites. It's playing with the girls when they were little. He had a great
Tony Jenkins' family says the consequences of not looking after the mental health of paramedics puts anyone who calls 000 at risk.
We want some answers, we need answers, but I think the broader community does. You know, the ambulance service is the organisation that you entrust with care for people when they're in crisis and when there's an emergency.
If they know it's a problem, why are paramedics self-medicating to begin with?
I think after 28 years of helping everybody else, when it came down to it, he did ask for help and he didn't receive it. And he deserved to receive it.
It's a complete recipe for disaster, where they go into a job that is stressful and they have that long-term trauma, they're not supported, and then they're around these very potent, dangerous drugs which aren't kept safe from themselves.